Earlier in the day of February 4th, 1990, Renaud had a slight run-in with a couple of residents of the Jewish retirement home that was on the corner of the street where he lived, and he decided he would teach them a lesson later on that evening. So, sometime after 11 that night, armed with only a small box of stick matches, he headed out his apartment with the intention of burning the entire building down. Renaud stated later that he didn't consider the danger that all the elderly residents would be in. He was only focused on retribution. As Renaud started on the path down the street, clad in his sweatpants, t-shirt and a long hooded bathrobe, all he could think about was how he had been treated growing up in the Brooklyn co-ops, where Renaud was labeled as a dangerous hooligan by the older Jewish residents. Even one time, when an elderly man pinned him in the elevator and putting a loaded gun under his chin had threatened to kill him if he messed with his wife again. The problem with that particular incident is that all he did was run past the lady while on his way to the store, and she thought he was running after her. Renaud was tired of being misunderstood, and his encounter at the retirement home brought those memories back. The street seemed quiet and empty as he walked down toward the retirement home, just the way he preferred. As he got to the rear of the retirement home, he walked down the driveway to the open entrance of the underground parking. There was no gate at the time, and looked for what could be an accelerant that could easily catch fire. He noticed a locked, fenced-in area that had lots of mattresses inside. Renaud thought he had hit pay dirt, so he went in trying to toss lit matches inside the locked fence, even landing on several of the mattresses, but none would catch fire. What Renaud didn't know at the time was that most mattresses were flame retardant and couldn't catch fire from a simple match thrown on it. So after about 10 minutes of doing this, he gave up and headed back home. While walking back, Renaud was very frustrated that he wasn't able to exact revenge on his retirement home. So on the way home, he kept his eye out for a substitute victim, per se. He didn't realize it at the time, but just across the street were several people stationed on the roof of a tall apartment building with binoculars, watching him walk down the street and turn up the driveway. He noticed what looked like a duplex next to the retirement home, but there was no parking. Renaud was looking for some type of parking area or structure, as those seemed to be the easiest to set fire, and it brought about the quickest results and most damage. The duplex had no parking within the building, so he walked past it and noticed an apartment with a driveway for parking in the back. As Renaud started up, he made a right turn with the intent to torch the apartment building next to his. Unfortunately for him, the parking area had no storage areas over the parking spaces, so intent on setting something on fire so as to not waste his time that night, he doubled back to the other part of the driveway and noticed that the parking area all had storage areas, just what he wanted. He walked toward the storage areas, and since most parking storage areas are completely open at the top, he tossed several lit matches in a few of them and headed back home. Something told him not to go back onto the street, So he went back to the rear parking of the first driveway and walked to his apartment building. So he went back to the rear parking of the first driveway and walked to his apartment building. Crossed over to the rear and went home. Witnesses would later say that they saw Renaud walk up the driveway and disappear into the night, never to be seen again. Once inside his apartment, he took off his robe and proceeded to go to bed. Later on, a neighbor knocked on his door, telling Renaud that there was a fire in the apartment building next to his. He didn't want to raise any suspicion, so he thought it would be best to go out there for a few moments and then go back inside in order to elude suspicion. Once Renaud went to the back of the apartment building, he noticed how big the fire was and was satisfied with what he did. Before going back to his apartment, a lady walked up to him and asked him his name. He thought she was just a nosy neighbor and told her that his name was Rennie. Later on still, after he went back inside, while lying in bed, he suddenly realized that it had gotten very quiet, and then he heard noises outside, which seemed to sound like rustling or walking. Renaud decided to go outside and peek through the security gate to see what was going on. As soon as he looked out through the security gate, he heard and saw several police pointing their weapons at him, telling him to get on the ground and lie face down. He was then arrested and eventually took a deal for 14 years, where he was sent to Pelican Bay State Prison.
So I understand, because I remember when I was young, I had an ex-boyfriend who went to prison. He was really cute, and I was with him, Norman. He went to prison for burning up buildings. They call it a pyromaniac. He used to burn up buildings, and he was so fine, though. And so, but I thought Suzanne, and I was young. Now, look, y'all looking at me like, oh my God, it didn't happen last Wednesday. It was when I was like in my early 20s. And I would follow him at night, y'all, because I thought he was cheating on me. That's what I thought it was. I would follow him, and he was taking so long, I went back into the apartment because I literally thought he was cheating on me. But he was burning up buildings.
Oh my God.
And then I was so relieved when I found out that he wasn't like cheating. Isn't that terrible? They told me he was a pyromaniac, and I was like, but he's not cheating though, right? So I can and then the thing about it, girl, and I thought that he loved me. I was like, oh, but he do love me, but he's just burning up these buildings. But it was so bad because he got arrested by like the Eyewitness News people. They came to his door. I'll never forget it. He had a Jerry curl cap on his head. You know, that's when you had the little carefree curls, the little young ones, y'all don't know. The carefree curls. He had the carefree curls. He had that plastic bag on his head. They had him laid out on the ground. And my parents was like, and this is the man you in love with? I said, but he didn't cheat, though.